Good morning. In 2003, March 19 to 21, the Land-Tenures Center of the University of Wisconsin in Madison, in collaboration with ACT consultant firm and the USAID and the Ministry of Agriculture of Trinidad and Tobago, held a learning workshop on land policy, administration, and management in the English-speaking Caribbean. This is the all-inspiring feature address by Dr. Jean Besson, a Jamaican with kinship ties in Dominica, Trinidad, and Guyana, an established student of history and social anthropology in the Caribbean, and who at that time was a senior lecturer in anthropology at Goldsmiths College in the University of London. This is the audio of her address.
And I'm going to summarize sections 1 to 6 very quickly and then focus more fully on section 7, which is on family land and common land management and nation building. Well, the first section, the introduction, outlines my main brief, which is to highlight, and I quote from the terms of reference, the wider historical, social and cultural trends underlying current debates about land policy, management and administration in the Caribbean, so as to bring to the surface some of the social and cultural attitudes that frame debates about land policy and practice, yet which usually remain unspoken, unquote. In this way, the paper contributes to the workshop's general objectives, which include the development of, and I quote from the tour, a Caribbean perspective on land administration and management, in order to ensure that the policies of international agencies reflect the realities of the region, unquote. Moving on to the second section, the colonial acquisition of indigenous territories. This situates the English-speaking Caribbean within the Caribbean oikoumene, a Greek concept meaning a great world area, so within the Caribbean societal region, which is a great historic world area unified by its common history as the oldest colonial sphere, with the most extreme experience of colonization, and partly forged through the acquisition of indigenous territories by Europe after 1492, but also typified, to quote Sidney Mintz, by the most remarkable drama of culture building in the modern world, unquote. The third section focuses on European land law and the development of official land tenure regimes from a historical perspective. And there I outline the colonial imposition of slave plantations, European land law, and official land tenure regimes. In the British West Indies, official land tenure regimes were traditionally based on legal freehold and primogeniture, precedence to the eldest legitimate son. In the fourth section, we look at the creation of Caribbean unofficial land tenure systems. And here I explore how enslaved Africans and Creoles resisted European land law and official land tenure regimes through rebellion, through maroonage or escape, and by appropriating customary rights to plantation house yards and provision grounds transmitted through both genders. And this unofficial tenure system, which was traced through both genders, anthropologically that's non-unilineal descent or cognatic descent, traced through both genders from male and female slaves through women and men. That system, during slavery, appropriated and overturned colonial plantation primogeniture. And this Creole culture building would burgeon in the unofficial family land institution among emancipated slaves and their descendants. So family land has a very long history going back into the culture building of slavery. In section 5, we look at colonial and unofficial land tenure systems after emancipation, the two systems coming out of slavery together. Well, after emancipation, planter policy obstructed land markets for ex-slaves. However, many ex-slaves, assisted, for example, by Baptist missionaries, established peasant communities, and they created family land from purchased land. However, the plantations persisted, and free villages with family lands provided a foothold for the peasantry. Section 6 looks at shifts in colonial land policy and decolonization. From the end of the 19th century, land settlement schemes became a focus for land administration and management. And with political independence, land reform became a focus of development, with debates on leasehold and freehold. But the poverty of the peasantry persisted, and free villages with family lands have continued to provide a foothold for the peasantry into the 21st century. Well, moving on to section 7, which is the main focus of the paper, this looks at family land and common land management and nation building. And I'm going to read a shortened version of this section. So if you're following it in the folder, it's a little shorter than you have there. Throughout Caribbean history, small-scale landholders have often been regarded as inhibiting development. Criticisms have included uneconomic, fragmented farms, chaotic cultivation, wasteful small-scale marketing, and underproductive unofficial land tenure systems. Such customary tenures, especially family land and common land, with their kin group and community burial grounds, have been condemned for obstructing land markets or lowering the market value of the land. For example, David Lowenthal observed in 1972 that, and I quote, "Local authorities condemn family land tenure as uneconomic, wasteful, a prime cause of soil exhaustion and erosion, an obstacle to agricultural modernization," unquote. Mintz likewise noted in 1989 that, and I quote, "Only rarely and briefly have European powers or even local governments viewed the peasantry as more than an obstacle to development, and the reasons for this negativism, as well as the negativism itself, still persist," unquote. In the 1990s, a recommendation was made to abolish family land tenure in Jamaica. In 2002, Dax Driver reported condemnation by environmentalists, foresters, planners, and international development experts of squatters in Trinidad's northern range, arguing that, and I quote, "the simple category of squatters reveals neither the complexity of people's social relationships with land, nor the varied land use practices associated with them," unquote. A comparable discourse currently surrounds the Jamaican squatter peasants of Zion, a settlement that has evolved on part of a former slave plantation as a satellite of the nearby Trelawney Free Village of Martha Bray, as I've recounted in my recent book, Martha Bray's Two Histories. And this is an ethnography of family land set in a Caribbean perspective. Indeed, such a discourse has long typified official attitudes to Caribbean squatter peasants, from the post-colonial squatters in the Greater Antilles and the first-time Maroons of Jamaica to the contemporary development debate surrounding the Barbudan Commons. However, Caribbean peasant landholders have been the backbone of the region's cultivation and culture from soon after the conquest through slavery, indenture, and decolonization, and into the new millennium. Their fragmented farms in enslavement and freedom have provided the basis for a creative adaptation of house yards and provision grounds on marginal land in the face of persisting land monopoly. Likewise, their multi-cropped food forests reflect ecological artistry modeled on natural forests rather than random chaos, transnational higglering systems. Moreover, the unofficial tenures of family land and common land are not anachronistic survivals from colonial or ancestral cultures, as many theorists contend. Theorists have argued their survivals from French colonialism, Roman Dutch law, English entailment, and so forth. Instead, they reflect dynamic Caribbean culture building, maximizing formerly forbidden kinship lines and scarce land rights, and providing a basis for food forests and participation in tourism. They're also cultural sites of identity for Caribbean peoples overseas. Such unofficial tenures incorporating both genders are widely found throughout the Caribbean today, including the English-speaking territories. Such tenures have been created in Jamaica, the Leeward and Windward Islands, the British Virgin Islands, the American Virgin Island of St. John, Barbados, Providencia, Tobago, and Trinidad. In Barbuda, the Bahamas, on the coastlands of Guyana and Suriname, among the Jamaican Maroons and the Black Caribs of Belize, and on the Carib reservations of Dominica and St. Vincent, family land tenure interweaves with common land. In all these cases, land rights are transmitted to all descendants of the original landholder, regardless of legitimacy, birth order, residence, and gender, reversing the colonial ethos of plantation primogeniture. Throughout the English-speaking Caribbean, the management of family land is vested in kin groups and family land trustees, who may be of either gender and frequently are women. Such land management is based on paradoxical but perceptive attitudes to land as both a limited economic good in the context of capitalist land monopoly and an unlimited symbolic resource within the kin group. The unlimited quality of family land is perceived as relating to its permanence and immortality rather than to its productive capacity or size. It is this immortal quality of the land that symbolizes the perpetuity of the enduring descent line. The short-term dimension of family land as a scarce economic good among living kin is therefore subordinated to its long-term symbolic role of serving generations. Such family land management generates at least 5 variants of land use, some of which may overlap, and all of which may be regarded as underproductive from a Eurocentric capitalist perspective. The first, and the most uneconomic with respect to land markets, are those plots of family land where yard burial persists, engrossed by graves, tombs, and vaults of family lines. A second variant are those plots lying empty due to migration. Third, there are yards cluttered with houses of resident kin which leave little room for cultivation. A fourth variant are those cases where cultivation by residents is subject to the inalienable rights of absentees, especially when symbolized by their practice of picking from the fruit trees. Finally, there are cases where the likelihood of migrants returning is remote and residents practice intensive cultivation. However, such production is for household use and sale in peasant markets and is based on multi-cropping, land use practices rooted in the proto-peasant past, that's during slavery, that are regarded as underproductive from the viewpoint of capitalist plantation monoculture. However, for each of these variants, the underproductive land use is a function of a wider complex of Caribbean values governing family land as a long-term symbolic resource as well as a short-term economic good. The so-called uneconomical patterns of land use associated with family land can therefore be reassessed as adaptive strategies to the constraints of persisting land monopoly, because the long-term role of family land can only be fully understood against the background of Caribbean agrarian relations. In addition, the circulatory migration enabled by family land management is generating an architectural transformation that is further developing Caribbean communities, namely a change from the construction of wooden cottages to the building of concrete houses with migrant savings and remittances. Such houses serve as family land hotels, accommodating visiting migrant kin. The management of unofficial common lands, wider than family lands of single family lines, that sustain Caribbean communities, which are often based on overlapping kin groups, has parallels with family land management. Such common land does not reflect Garrett Hardin's tragedy of the commons as a limited economic good that is wasteful, unproductive, and non-sustainable. For example, the Barbudan commons have long provided a basis for identity among the members of the island's single village of Codrington, as well as for swidden cultivation and feral livestock raising. Likewise, writing of the Bahamas out islands, renamed the Family Islands, Michael Creighton predicted that, and I quote, "The ownership of land in common, its transmission from the kin, through the kin from generation to generation, and the allocation of its use to families according to need may well continue to prevail over a borrowed and expediential legalism that stems from the European Middle Ages and the subsequent era of bourgeois capitalism," unquote. In Jamaica, the common treaty land of the Leeward Maroons sustains houseyard and provision ground food forests, cash cropping, livestock raising, and provides forest medicines and timber. The Leeward Commons, which Maroons state were left by Colonel Cudjoe for the born and the unborn, are also sacred space and a cultural site in the global networks of modern migrant Maroons who return to visit and participate in the annual Mayal ritual. In the Leeward Island of Nevis, where sharecropped estates were bought for government land settlements through rental, the peasantry transformed the officially imposed solution of land settlement into an unofficial system combining the principles of common land and family land, despite the virtual absence of either long leases or legal freehold. Caribbean customary tenures have also transformed state law in the wider context of a dynamic interplay between official land tenure regimes and unofficial land tenure systems, embedded in kinship lines, communities, and ethnic identities. This dynamic interplay includes the imposition of state law on customary tenures, as in land retrieval, registration and taxation and burial legislation, crab antics, or the use of legal systems in family land disputes, selective reinforcement, such as the transmission of family land through making a will, and indirect legal reinforcement of customary tenures, as in picking from family land fruit trees, being legal evidence of land occupancy. Most significantly, Caribbean unofficial tenures, based on cognatic descent traced through both women and men and rooted in the adaptation of slaves, have overturned Eurocentric and androcentric or male-biased plantation primogeniture and led to the abolition of so-called illegitimacy, as in the Status of Children Act in Jamaica, 1976, the Family Law Act of Barbados, 1981, and also in Antigua-Barbuda. In the American Virgin Island of St. John, family land has likewise now been recognized by the American legal system. The post-independence era has seen the introduction of legal restrictions on landlord-tenant relations and on foreign ownership of Caribbean land. The significant nationalization of private land, as with some sugar plantations in Trinidad and Jamaica, has likewise played a part in the official creation of nation-states. Within such contexts, unofficial tenures have also provided models for nation-building, as with Susu land in Trinidad and Tobago. In the case of the Jamaican squatter settlement of Zion, squatter peasants, including Rastafarians, in dialogue with the state, are appropriating, transforming, and developing a government-owned estate where their ancestors were enslaved in the Caribbean plantation heartlands at the very core of Babylon. Likewise, the Leeward Maroon Commons have become a symbol of Jamaican nationhood as national government representatives attend Mayal rituals. In such ways, small-scale landholders, with their unofficial land tenures, continue to build Caribbean culture and law and contribute to nation building, as did their ancestors in the post-conquest and post-emancipation past. In the current drive to expand land markets in the Caribbean region, and in dialogues between Caribbean governments and international donors and development experts, a secure place therefore needs to be found in land policy, administration, and management for these customary tenures and their complex social relationships rooted in Caribbean history, culture, and land.